Hola, Facebook. It's Beto here, your daily divinity coach, here for episode 29 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. I'm just going to take a few minutes and tag some folks so we can get an audience going. If you've already watched the introduction of one of my episodes, feel free to go ahead and fast forward while I do this. So I'm going to go ahead and tag some folk, let them know that we're now live. See Emma Lou's name. Shout out to Emma Lou. So again, just going through and tagging some folk, letting them know that we're live so that we can get an audience going for this episode. So again, episode number 29 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. So just seeing who's out there, who we can tag, let them know that we're live, and soon we'll have an audience and we'll be able to get going with this show. So again, really excited about this show. I think you'll enjoy it very much. It's episode 29 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. And just tagging some folk, letting them know that we're going to go ahead and get started soon here. Just going to tag a few more people. Just looking at the names here, seeing who's active now. And we'll go ahead and get started real soon. So just going to tag a few more people. And I'm sure we'll get our audience going really soon here. So see a couple more people that are live. See who else we can tag. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. And all right, shout out to Emma Lou worked. Emma Lou's in the house. So Emma Lou, if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up or throw some flags. Let me know you can hear me. Looks like a heart just went up. And yeah, so it looks like my audio is working well. So, and it looks like we got some more people joining. Excellent. All right, Lady. Awesome. So we got Emma Lou, Lady. I'm sure more will be joining. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with a brief introduction of myself, and then we'll get going with the content of today's episode. So I am Beto. I am your daily divinity coach. I'm here for episode 29 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. Episode number 29 is entitled, The Falling American Empire, the Emerging Fifth World, and the Pending Currency Revolution. Today is Sunday, January 17th, 2021. I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself, give an introduction, but if you want to learn more about me, you can always go to my website, dailydivinitycoach.com. So I teach on three topics, three main subjects. Number one, the law of attraction. I was tutored by my mother in the law of attraction since I was a young child. 10 years. I was, after being here for about 10 years, roaming the earth as a young child, my mother began tutoring me in the law of attraction. So it's been several decades now. Anyhow, so I talk about the law of attraction and manifesting abundance. The second subject or topic that I talk about is liberation theology. So I'm a divinity school graduate. I graduated Harvard University Divinity School, and the emphasis of my studies at divinity school there at Harvard was liberation theology. So I talk about liberation theology, or what I also refer to as manifesting justice, or social justice. So that's number two. The third subject or topic that I discuss is anti-aging. So I did a 10-year self-study on anti-aging, and before I began to profess my immortality. And so anyhow, I talk about anti-aging and what I call manifesting immortality. So those are the three main subjects. I am a pluralist, so I teach all. So there's people who watch my shows and read my posts that are Jewish and Muslim, Catholic and Protestant, Buddhist and Hindu, spiritual and searching, atheist and agnostic. Everybody gets something out of these shows, and that thrills me because that's the purpose. And I also use inclusive language, like the divine, the great teacher. So you'll hear inclusive language being used by me because I want to include everybody. So what else do I do? In addition to the daily posts and these weekly shows, I also produce manifest bracelets. So there's a set of 3 manifest bracelets. The black one reads Manifest Immortality, the blue one Manifest Abundance, and the gray one Manifest Justice. And so I produce and give these away for free. If you're within the U.S., shipping is always free. And until the end of March, shipping will be free to anyone in Europe or North America. So if you haven't received your Manifest bracelets yet, please reach out. You can IM me, DM me. You can also download a form on my website, dailydivinitycoach.com, and I just need a name and an address, and I'll send a set out to you. If you want a set to go to a family member or friend, more than happy to do that. Again, I just need a name and an address. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get going now. The introduction's done with the start of the episode. So again, episode number 29, the falling American empire, the emerging fifth world, and the pending currency revolution, otherwise known as the episode with the long title. I think this is the longest title yet. So anyhow, let's start with the American Empire. What is the American Empire? How did it start? Blah, 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 blah. So the American Empire is the successor of the Western European white supremacist empires, right, that participated, that committed the atrocities of the genocide of indigenous Americans, right? My people, Emalus people, we're related, that's why I say that. Anyhow, the genocide of indigenous Americans and the atrocity of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Bringing Africans to the Americas, not just to the United States of America, to Brazil, right? To Mexico, to Haiti, right? Part of the transatlantic slave trade of Africans to the Americas. And so this line of succession includes the Portuguese, right? The Portuguese Empire, right? Again, think Brazil. The Spanish Empire, think all of Latin America. The French, the Dutch, and the British, right? The British, which actually bred the U.S. colony, which became the United States of America, and then the U.S. Empire, the American Empire. The U.S., right? America's Western expansion. America had its own Western expansion, right? Started on the East Coast, and then moved west, right? And that continued this ongoing atrocity of genocide of indigenous Americans, right? Of Native Americans. It also included the Louisiana Purchase, right? The U.S., for $15 million, they gave $15 million to France and acquired the Louisiana Territory. That was in 1803. This expansion west, right? So there's this movement from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, also included the seizure of the northern part of Mexico, right? What is known today as the Southwest. So this would include today's states of Texas and Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and I don't think I'm missing any, but you know, that part of the U.S., the Southwest United States, which is also known as Aztlan, and we've talked about this in the past, right? Chicano activists, Chicanos we refer to the Southwest part of the United States as Aztlan because we believe that this is our ancestral homeland. Well, not this, I'm in Boston now, but this being California, Texas, Colorado, the whole Southwest, right? And this has been proven to be true. It's not a myth. My co-advisor at Harvard Divinity School, David Carrasco, has proved this, and other academics have said, yes, it's true. Aztlan is true. That's the ancestral homeland of the descendants of the Mexica Azteca, right? The descendants of the Maya. This is part of the Hopi talk about this, right? The Native Americans, the Hopi, say that the Mexica Azteca, the Maya, were actually are Hopi. They're part of us. They just never completed their four-directional migration. They never came home. And so now we're home. And so we call the Southwest our ancestral homeland, Aztlan. So anyhow, back to the U.S. So when did the U.S. actually become an empire by definition? It became an empire by definition when it established its first overseas colony, which was Hawaii, which is now a state of the U.S. And that happened in 1898. So that's when the U.S. actually became an empire. After the Allied victory of World War II, so you know the U.S. participated in World War II, right? Fought against the Axis, fought against Nazi Germany and Japan. Italy, after the Allied victory of World War II, which the U.S. helped win, not solely, but was part of the Allied troops, the U.S. became the empire, right? So not only did it become an empire in 1898, but in 1945 it really became the empire. After World War II, the U.S. ended up occupying West Germany, Italy, Spain, right? It became the empire. But it wasn't the only empire after 1945 because there was a competitor, right? The competitor was the Soviet Union, the USSR, right? They also participated with the Allied troops in defeating the Axis, right? And they had their own empire, right? There in Eastern Europe. But then something happened, right? Late 80s, early 90s, the USSR, the former Soviet Union, began to break apart, right? And then at that point, the U.S. became really the only empire of real significance or importance. And that you probably remember the USSR when it broke apart. Part of that was the fall of the Berlin Wall. Remember 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. There's a lot of video footage, people taking parts of the wall, right, as artifacts, right, of the end of the Cold War. I remember MTV, I think, had a bunch of videos. Anyhow, the USSR broke apart, and the U.S. really became the only empire of importance at that point. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about factors that lead to the end of empires, right? What are the factors that lead to the end of empires? Number one, we're going to talk about 5. Number 1, overreaching militarily. I'm going to give an example. Afghanistan. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. The British, right, overreached militarily, went into Afghanistan, they ceased being an empire. The Russians overreached militarily, went into Afghanistan, ceased being an empire. And guess who went into Afghanistan after 9/11? We did, right? The U.S. The U.S. went into Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, and now look what's happening. We are nearing the end of the American empire. Second factor that leads to the end of empires, the mistreatment of people outside the center of the empire. So in every empire there's a center, right? There's the rulers, right? The influencers, right? The business elite or the corporate elite. There's always those people at the center of the empire that are really benefiting the most from the empire. Then there's people like just outside the empire, right? Just on the periphery. And those people, as the empire begins to end, begin to be mistreated. And then those on the outside, right, the marginalized, right, begin to be treated as the enemy. And the American empire, the marginalized, have always been treated as the empire. That's nothing new. Genocide, right? Genocide of indigenous folk, indigenous Americans, slavery, Jim Crow. I've done episodes on the war on drugs, the prison industrial complex, ICE, right? Being treated as the enemy. So the American empire has actually done this since the beginning. What other factors lead to the end of empires? Number 3, plague. Plague leads to the end of empires. What's going on right now? What's been going on for almost a year now, or probably longer than a year if we ever get our facts correct. COVID-19, right? The U.S. is at nearly 400,000 deaths as a result of COVID-19. The U.S. really has taken the brunt of the mortality rate of COVID. The U.S. is not the most populated nation, yet it has the most COVID deaths, or reported COVID deaths. 100 years ago, the last pandemic was the Spanish flu. The recorded or estimated number of deaths of the Spanish flu was 675,000. We're quite a ways off from 675,000, but 400,000, we're not too far off, right? So, hopefully praying that we don't end up there, but it's, the death toll could end up, somewhere closer to 675,000 than we expected at the beginning. I didn't think, honestly, I didn't think it'd go over 350,000. So almost at 400 now. So anyway, plague. We're seeing that right now, right? The first global pandemic in 100 years, and the U.S. Isn't responding well, right? People are dying, and that shouldn't be dying. Fourth factor we want to talk about today that leads to the fall of empires, the debasing of the currency. And I'm going to do a separate episode just talking about that, the debasing of the currency. And I'm already playing with the title in my head that I'm really excited about. I don't know if any of you have seen the TV series that was on USA Network. It's on Amazon now, called Mr. Robot. But anyway, I want to bring Mr. Robot in, talk about the movement to end the Fed, and just do a whole thing on debasing the currency, whole episode. But anyhow, fourth factor, debasing the currency. For this episode, we're going to talk about two things underneath that topic, which are debt and the erosion of the tax base. Right? This leads to the end of empires. So, the end of 2020, right, the year that just ended a couple weeks ago, the publicly held debt, publicly held U.S. debt, was 99.3% of gross domestic product. 99.3% of gross domestic product. And of that, 37% of that publicly held debt was held by foreigners, right? People outside the U.S. So let's put this into perspective, historical perspective. Just after World War II, U.S. debt peaked. It was the highest we'd ever seen it, was 113% of GDP. But remember, the U.S. had just won, right? We had just won World War II, right? So we had to create debt to win this war, and now, it became the empire, right? We're not winning World War III right now, right? There is no World War III. There's a plague, there's insurrection, there's ICE, there is no World War III. So anyhow, with incoming President Joe Biden's stimulus plan, we could actually set new heights, right? We can go past that 113% of GDP, which was the previous peak after World War II in 1945. That's definitely a possibility with this at the new stimulus plan that's going to be going out. Actually, part of it already started going out. So there's debt. Taxes. Let's talk about taxes. The elites closest to the center of an empire, right? The rulers, the business elite, the corporate elites, the influencers, the people closest to the center of the empire. As empires are falling, they just stop wanting to support the empire financially. So they do everything they can to get out of paying taxes. They just don't want to pay taxes anymore. They don't want to pay their fair share or any taxes. That's what happens at the fall of empires. So what's going on in the U.S.? Under outgoing President Donald Trump's tax plan, 60 of the 500 Fortune 500 companies, 60 of the Fortune 500 companies paid zero taxes in 2018. Let's use an example. Amazon in 2018 recorded a record profit of $11 billion. And on that $11 billion, they paid zero taxes. And that was actually the second consecutive year that Amazon paid $0 in taxes. Now, going back to those 60 Fortune 500 companies, those 6,500 Fortune 500 companies, instead of paying $16.5 billion in taxes, which would have been under the previous tax plan, they actually received, I'm sorry for laughing, but it's laughable, a net corporate tax rebate of $4.3 billion. They actually got money back. Not only did they pay zero, but they actually got money back. I mean, it is laughable. But this is what happens at the end of empires. Laughable stuff around taxes. The erosion of the tax base. Let's use a personal example. Outgoing President Trump himself, who boasts of being a billionaire, right, paid only, again, it's laughable, $750 in taxes in 2016, right, his first year, the year he's elected to be president, and another $750 in taxes in 2017. Pretty much zero. I mean, pretty darn close to zero. I'm an everyday person just like you are. I pay way more in taxes than this guy did. And he's at the very center of the empire. Well, he's leaving now, but he's been at the very center of the empire for the last 4 years. The guy pays basically relatively zero in taxes. Amazing, right? Laughable if it wasn't so serious. So now moving on to the fifth factor, and now we're getting into real current events here. So the fifth factor that leads to the end of empires. Insurrection. Insurrection. I promised you last week I was going to talk about what happened at the U.S. Capitol 11 days ago. So 11 days ago, January 6th, we witnessed the first armed insurrection of the U.S. Capitol in 200 years. Right? We're in the midst of a plague we haven't seen the likes of which in 100 years. Now we just witnessed the first armed insurrection of the U.S. Capitol in 200 years. What were the results? 5 people died, unfortunately, including Capitol Police Officer Brian D. Sicknick, who passed away a hero, may he rest in peace, trying to stop the insurrection. Of the other 4 dead, they were insurrectionists, right? The other 4 dead were insurrectionists. One was former military, actually Air Force trained. And there have been other reports that former or current military, former or current law enforcement participated in the insurrection. The reports I read, and still a little vague to me, so I didn't want to come out and say they definitely did, but I can say there's reports that definitely former law enforcement and current law enforcement participated. So anyhow, what about on the other side? 56 District of Columbia, D.C. Metro cops were injured, and 60 Capitol police officers were injured, and of those 60, 15 were hospitalized, and as I said before, one unfortunately passed away. So there's a lot of injuries, there's hospitalizations, and unfortunately even deaths that occurred 11 days ago there at the U.S. Capitol as a result of this armed insurrection, the likes of which we haven't seen in 200 years. More about what took place at the Capitol and whatnot. At least 80 people, 80 insurrectionists, I should say, have been charged. At least 34 have been arrested, and this is as a result of over 140,000 tips that have been received, right? People calling, emailing, whatnot, giving the FBI and other law enforcement tips, and resulted in charges and arrests. What are the charges? What have people been charged with? These charges include domestic terrorism, seditious conspiracy, and insurrection. So what exactly happened? Well, as I understand it, I wasn't there, but this is how I understand it. There was a rally outside the White House on that day, 11 days ago, January 6th. And apparently there are thousands of people. I'm not sure the exact amount. I might try to get an exact amount for you, but it looked like thousands of people attended this rally outside the White House, and President Donald Trump was one of the speakers. And during his speech to the rally people, who were, I imagine almost all, if not all, were his supporters, he implored them to march down to the Capitol and fight like hell to overturn the election of incoming President Joe Biden. So, lo and behold, most, if not all, but I guess most of the people who were there at that rally marched down to the U.S. Capitol. And then many of those that marched down decided to storm the building. Right? They stormed the Capitol building, hoping that they could stop the election, the formalization of the election of Joe Biden. And they occupied, vandalized, and looted the part of the Capitol, part of the building for hours. The Capitol was evacuated, right? They evacuated the House of Representatives, the senators, they were evacuated. None of them ended up, passing away, thankfully, and they locked down the Capitol. But this was after hours of the insurrectionists occupying the Capitol. So what happened in the aftermath? Well, the joint session of Congress, which the Vice President President Pence was presiding over, did come back later that evening and did formalize the election of Joe Biden as the incoming president. Donald Trump, outgoing President Donald Trump, had been trying to get Mike Pence to stop the formalization of the election victory, but Vice President Mike Pence said that no, I have no constitutional authority to do it, and didn't do it, and actually went ahead and certified the election results, formalized the election results. So more about the aftermath. So what we know about insurrections is historically they lead to longer campaigns of political violence. So there have been reports of planned attempts of political violence at the inauguration this coming Wednesday. As a result, there are troops, right, National Guard troops that are occupying the Capitol right now, and they're patrolling the Capitol, right, because of these reports of planned attempts for more violence there at the U.S. Capitol this Wednesday on Inauguration Day. There's also been reports of planned political violence campaigns aimed at U.S. capitals, at state capitals across the U.S. In different states. And this has reminded us of what happened 120 years ago, right, in Wilmington, North Carolina. White supremacists actually successfully overthrew the local government there. There's a coup, and they're successful, these white supremacists. They weren't happy with the local government, which included 3 legitimately elected African-American aldermen, 3 of the 10. And there's a fusionist government, right, that was inclusive, and the white supremacists said, no, we can't have that. And they actually overthrew the local government there. So there's a history of white supremacists here in the U.S. Doing these coups, right? And that one was actually successful. So anyhow, another part of the aftermath is outgoing President Donald Trump has been impeached. The House of Representatives, in a bipartisan vote, so this wasn't just Democrats, actually 10 Republicans joined the Democrats and impeached outgoing President Donald Trump for his part in the insurrection. And he now awaits trial in the Senate. So that's up to the Senate to convict him. So now we're going to talk about the fifth world and put this all into a bigger spiritual perspective here, right? So now, pretty obvious to most, or I hope most, anyhow, the falling American empire, right? Whether it's fallen or falling or gonna fall, it's gonna end, right? And to me, it's gonna end sooner than later, probably with, real soon. But anyhow, the American empire is falling. So people are like, who's next? Who's next, right? And I read these reports and I read these articles, and everybody's like, China's the next empire, China. And not gonna happen, I'll tell you right now, on this day, actually, I'm a little behind on my things here, but on this day, it's not gonna happen. China is not gonna be the next empire. Why am I so sure of that? Because I know my oral history, I know my written history, I know my ancient texts, and I know my ancient wisdom. And the Hopi Maya, the ancient Hopi Maya prophecy tells me that this fourth world is ending. This era of empires is ending. This era of divisions, right? Things that divide us as humanity is ending. This era of hyper-materialism is ending. So there's nothing to be scared of, right? Obviously, people are fearful of violence, but there's nothing to be fearful in so far as what's coming next, right? There's hope, right? And it's a big hope. It's an awesome hope, right? That all this junk of the fourth world, this negativity and this, these divisions are gonna end, right? Humanity is actually going to unite and live in harmony, not just with each other, but with nature too. How is this, and people say, how is this going to happen, Bethel? Why are you so sure? How is this going to happen? Well, it's going to happen because, and this is the last part of the title of this episode, there's going to be a currency revolt, right? The last part of this episode is the pending currency revolt. there's going to be a currency revolt. And when I say that, a lot of people say, what are you talking about? Bitcoin? You're talking about Bitcoin, Beto? No, I'm not talking about Bitcoin. And I am going to do a future episode, tie in Bitcoin to that episode that I'm thinking about on debasing the currency. But anyhow, no, it's not going to be Bitcoin, although I appreciate that response. It's going to be a spiritual revolution. It's going to be spiritual currency is what's going to happen. The ancient Maya, Hopi Maya, said the fourth world is going to end, right? All the divisions are going to end. The hypermaterialism is going to end. And it's going to end by spiritual warfare, by a spiritual conflict, by spiritual revolution, right? So what's going to happen is man-made money, right? The worship of man-made money, it's going to go by the wayside. Why is that? Because time is going to replace money. Time is more valuable. It's a more valuable, way more valuable currency than money, man-made money. So what's going to happen is those of us who've been pressed to the margins, right? Us, what I like to say, the spiritual misfits. The great teacher talks about the meek inheriting the earth. The Hopi talk about the humble. Those of us, again, I like the term spiritual misfits, are going to manifest immortality, right? Right? This campaign of anti-aging, it's going to happen, right? And instead of this expected lifespan of about 80 years, you're going to see people living to be 200, 400, 800 years, maybe even a millennium. And that's going to replace this whole this whole thing of man-made money being the currency. Time is going to replace that. Time will become the currency. That's how the spiritual revolution is going to take place. That's what's, and so anyhow, us spiritual misfits, right? The meek shall inherit the earth. We'll usher in the fifth son. And I know I'm over my time, but I'm going to end with a parable from the great teacher. I'm going to bring ancient text in. And this is a parable I've used before, and it's a great one. And so anyhow, according to this parable, there's a rich young man. And the rich young man comes to the great teacher and says that he wants to, learn from the great teacher. Teach me, right? And the great teacher says, great, yeah, come follow me. I'll, show you the secrets of the universe. But before you do, I need you to go and sell all your material possessions and give the proceeds to the poor. So what happens to this rich young man? He becomes sorrowful. He becomes sad, depressed, right? He's like, oh my goodness, anything but that, right? Why? Because he's given into the science of scarcity. Economics is the science of scarcity. And that was basically this rich young man's religion, right? And the great teacher was offering him something different, right? He's offering him true abundance, right? Not this fake man-made abundance, right? Fourth world abundance, right? Abundance based on divisions, right? And hypermaterialism. No, the great teacher wanted to offer him true abundance, right? The peace that surpasseth all understanding, right? Immortality, right? Not just immortality of the soul, but immortality. So the great teacher wanted to show him the secrets of the universe, but the rich young man couldn't get past. He couldn't get past this idea of having to sell all his material possessions and give it to the poor, even though the great teacher would have taught him how to manifest his every need, right? Need for shelter and clothes and food, all that. He would have been taught to manifest that, but he couldn't get his head past what was his religion, the economics of scarcity. Couldn't get past it. But we can. We can live into true abundance, right? We can get past that scarcity of resources, right? That's the definition of economics, the science of the study of the scarcity of resources, right? We can get past all of that, and we can get down to true abundance, which includes time, right? Immortality, right? And we can do that, and we can usher in the fifth world. And so there's hope. There's hope beyond all this calamity, right? All this violence and nonsense and just chaos that we're seeing, not just here in the U.S., but globally. There's hope beyond that. It's a big hope. It's a spiritual hope. And and it's awesome, and I hope you feel hopeful now. So I'm going to go ahead and end here. It's been episode, it's not up here. It's been episode number 29 of my weekly series, Sunday Weekly Revival. I'm so grateful for you. I'm appreciative of this forum to be able to share this information, this knowledge, wisdom. It brings me joy and gratitude. I'm humbled that you all have joined, and if you missed any part of this, I will go ahead and put the recording up on Facebook, so you can go back and watch the recording, or you can share it with friends. I will be back here again next week. I'm here every week, every Sunday, starting at 8:35 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, all right, on the West Coast, where I'm originally from, and 11:35 a.m. East Coast time, Eastern Standard Time, where I am now here in Boston. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and put on my reading glasses, which I won't need soon as I'm anti-aging, but go ahead, put these on and turn this off. So hope you can join next week, and thank you very much. I'm very grateful that you're able to join this week. Bye-bye now.